Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me for our Friday morning coaching session. I'm going to keep today's session pretty short since I know many of you guys are getting ready for a long weekend. But a couple things that I did want to cover for today is I wanted to talk about negotiating. So once a month, I attend a group. It's a CEO roundtable. It's once a month, and every month I have to take a whole day off. I'm with these other CEOs for the day. Well, we always bring in a guest speaker, and this month's guest speaker was incredible. His background is on how to become a better negotiator, and I took a million notes during this program that was like 2 hours long. His company, interestingly, is called Lion Share Negotiation. And here's the gist of it and what I took away from it, because it applies to everything that we do in real estate. So we did, first of all, this whole exercise on negotiating a great deal. So what they did is, to start the entire class off, they broke the room in half. So half the people were contractors, and the other half of the room were homeowners that wanted to get a kitchen done in their new house or in their house. So there was fact sheets given to both sides, and I was on the contractor side, and there was a fact sheet given to the homeowner, and the idea was to see who could negotiate, like on the contractor side, who could negotiate like the best deal for new cabinets. And it was very limited facts. So on my side, as a contractor, it basically said in my fact sheet, like, you had that the contractor has very little business. They just laid off a bunch of workers. He only has a couple more workers left. And if he doesn't get this job, he's going to have to lay off his brother-in-law, who is his employee. And so that the contractor is willing to go as low as $18,000 to get this job done, because the $18,000 would make it so that he could carry himself through the rest of the season and not have to lay off his brother. Now, there was also an entire fact set given to the other side, the people who were the homeowners. And so then they paired us up. So everybody in the room was then paired up. So I was then paired up with a homeowner to see like what the negotiations look like. And again, remember, it's very limited facts, but also the whole point of this was like, when you're negotiating with somebody, you don't have the whole story. You don't know how much they're willing, how high they're willing to go, for example. So it's not unusual. That's kind of where we all are when we're negotiating with someone. So first of all, I spent, 5 minutes asking this guy, the homeowner, all these questions to try to gauge like, how much would he be willing to spend? Because I needed this job. So I knew that if I went too high, I was going to lose the job. And then if I went too low, I couldn't go below $18,000 according to the fact sheet. So I do what I think many negotiators do, is you just start gathering facts. So I started asking questions like, how quickly do you need it done? What kind of kitchen do you want? Like, do you want super low ends, like you could get, say, at a Home Depot, or do you want super high end? Are you looking for middle of the road? So I could kind of gauge, like, is he going to be like shopping price? Then I asked questions like, what's important to you? What do you really care about? And how fast? What are the things that you need done? And then, as he started like giving me some information, now I had the information I knew that I could build value around. So one of the things I knew on the homeowner's end is he was in a rush. So he had talked to another contractor, and that it was going to take several months to get the kitchen. So he started asking questions like, how quickly could you get it done? And then I said, well, for a premium, I can pull my people off of another job. So long story short, I came in right around the middle of the road. My homeowner agreed to pay $35,000 for the cabinets. There were some people in our group that got like the bare minimum, $18,000, $19,000, $20,000. But there were also people in the room that got $60,000, $65,000, $70,000. So it was kind of interesting. What was later disclosed is on the other side of the table, we got to then see after the exercise was done on the other side, like the homeowners were allowed to go as high as 70,000. So it was interesting because what you realize when you're negotiating, when you're talking about your value proposition, when you're showing up at a listing presentation, like you want the business, and sometimes we are our own worst enemies. We are negotiating with ourselves long before we are negotiating with another party. And I see Kim, somebody else actually recommended that same book to me. Kim Bagney said there's a book by Chris Voss about negotiations, because I think some of what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to just see what Chris Voss's book is. I bet you it's the same one somebody else just recommended. What's so interesting that I'm going to share with you some of the specific points that I learned at this negotiation class, because I will tell you it's totally going to change the way that I negotiate. Yes. So Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference, same thing. Never split the difference, same thing. But it's so interesting to me because I think real estate agents constantly undercut themselves when they go on like a listing presentation. And it's not that the seller is undercutting the agent, it's that the agent is undercutting themselves in their own head. So we're negotiating with ourselves in our own heads. And then, because if you think about it, like even on that exercise that I did with the contractor and the homeowner, like knowing that you have to, never split the difference is the title, Julie. On that exercise, the $18,000 was in my head. Like I knew I had to get $18,000. So that was like anchoring me to a particular price in my head. And where I should have been trying to anchor is much higher based on what it was that the consumer needed and what value that I could give to that consumer. But I wanted to tell you some of the notes that I took from this negotiating class. Number one, the gentleman that was presenting the program to us asked an important question after we did that. So he went around the room, there's roughly 20 of us in the group, and he said, how many so in which instances did the homeowner throw out the first price? And in which instances did the contractor throw out the first price? So any of you guys that just logged in, like this was just an exercise in my CEO roundtable group this week. And they said, it was an exercise where they gave half the room a piece of paper and they said, you're going to be a contractor. The other half of the room is going to be a homeowner. And we're going to see who can negotiate the best deal on cabinets. And so one side of the room had very specific fact pattern. And then the other room had a very specific fact pattern, but we didn't know each other's fact pattern. And so my side of the room, I was a contractor. I had to see how high I could negotiate on cabinets. So after the exercise was done, what I said is that the prices came anywhere between like 18,000, which was the minimum, and the maximum that some of the people got for those cabinets was $60,000. So the gentleman that was presenting the program went around the room and said, who was the first one to throw out a price? The contractor or the homeowner for each of these little groups. What's interesting is in the instances where the contractor threw out the price first, those negotiations, the contractor made significantly more. And in the instances where the homeowner threw out the first price, the contractor made significantly less. So he said, when you're negotiating, who should be the first person to throw out the price? Now, I will tell you that my whole thought, my entire life of negotiating has always been like, if you're negotiating for something, I'll give you an example. I've been negotiating recently on buying a real estate office, an existing real estate office in one of our territories. And I asked them to throw out the price. Now, why do that? So my mentality on all this was, well, if they throw out the price, it might be way less than if I threw out a higher price. So what this gentleman from Lion Share Negotiating said is, you are in a lesser position. You will have a hard time maximizing what you get if you let the other side throw out the first price. The reason for that is a concept called anchoring. And what anchoring is, and I took a picture of the screen to get the definition. It's called the anchor rule, and it says a number that a person sees or hears prior to making a guess influences that guess. Whether it is rational or relevant does not matter. I'm going to say that again. Anchor rule. A number that a person sees or hears prior to making a guess influences that guess. Whether it is rational or relevant does not matter. So he threw out all these interesting business studies. One of them, for example, was like a study group that really want to find out how much does a number, any number out there, influence how much we say that we're willing to pay for something. So what they did is they ran a test. It was like at a movie theater. So the movie theater said that we're going to auction off a mouse. So it was like a fancy computer mouse. So at the movie theater, this company that's running the survey says, we're going to auction off this really fancy gadget, this cool mouse. Whoever's willing to pay the most for it will win it. So what they said to do is, first of all, as the people were coming into the theater, they had to write down on a blank piece of paper that they were going to hold on to the last 2 digits of their social security number. And then once they got in, they got to see the mouse. And now they said, okay, now on that same sheet of paper, turn it over. And on the back, you're going to put what your bid is for this fancy gadget. The people that had higher social security numbers, so like in the 80s, 90s, 70s, 80s, 90s, the last 2 digits of their social security number, those people bid on average 80% higher than somebody that had a low last 2 digits of their social security number, like a 01, 02, 10, 20. So the whole point of that, and there's all kinds of research on this, is that some absolutely arbitrary number in our head, if it is presented to us in conjunction or in relatively same amount of time in which we have to put a number, a financial number on something, we relate the two in our own heads. So that's why the whole idea of it is that you don't ever want to be anchored. He said what happens is when you're anchored, I'm going to just give you an example. You guys are well worth a 6% commission. Many of you guys charge a 6% commission when you're marketing a property. Well, let's say that you're going in and one of the things that the seller says to you is that, yeah, I understand. I'm excited to talk to you. I know that there's a cost involved with me listing my property, and I understand that it's 4%. What happens now is we've been anchored. That means now in our head, while we're doing the presentation, we are trying to figure out a way that we can like cut out services, how we can get to the number that this person already expects in their head. The opposite is true is if you are the one to anchor. Now, if you're the one to anchor the other party, even if it's at the beginning, throwing out a number, that person, because they like you, as you're doing the presentation, they start justifying all the reasons why they feel you're worth the extra or what the amount more that they. So let's just say that even if you're higher than average, they will start justifying why you're worth every penny of that price because you've anchored them. I'm going to actually put together a whole class because I'm kind of winging this right now just based on my notes from this program. But I will tell you, it was cutting edge stuff about how to negotiate your way through a transaction. The other thing that he talked about is concessions. So as real estate agents, for example, there's a million little things that we do in order to help somebody facilitate the listing of their property. And what he talked about is that if you are ever asked to make a concession, he says, like, what you should always do is figure out, let's say there's 50 things you do to get a property sold. Now think about this. In your listing presentation, you talk about all these things you do to help the consumer. You're going to email out the listing to your database. You're going to do professional photography. You're going to do Facebook and social media videos and advertisements. You're going to do broker open houses, weekend open houses for consumers. Think about that. A million things. Now, what this gentleman would say we do poorly is we kind of clump that all together. So we say, this is our value proposition. Here's the 50 things I'm going to do to get your property sold. And we're not very good at necessarily articulating out the value of each of those items. Because what he says is that concessions are super, super, super powerful. And so he said, never give up something. So let's just say somebody negotiates your compensation down. He's like, absolutely never just let it get negotiated down. That you always need to get something in return for it. So that's where those concessions come in. And he said, all right, so like, let's say that somebody says, I'm willing to sign with you, but I need you to knock off whatever, 0.5%. What he would say is then you have to say, okay, well, which of these items, so the value of professional photography is this amount, so we'll have to remove this item. Or on the other end is that you can get something like a longer contract. So you say, okay, I'm willing to do that, but instead of a 5-month contract, I really need a 10-month contract. But he said, never simply negotiate down, like without the other side also giving in to a concession. The reason for that is because if you don't ask for something in return for that concession, then in that other side, the other party's head, they're going to think your number was arbitrary all the time. And because they now think your number was arbitrary all the time, they're going to ask for more. So I said I was going to keep this short, and I'm already at 20 minutes. So he said that you always should have a concession strategy in general. Number one, he said, plan on making concessions. So rather than negotiating down on commission, like instead there's other ways that you can concede things. So have a system in place for making concessions. Know your concessions and value them. So that's why he said, when it comes to your value proposition, break it all out and assign values to every single one of them. Also, rationalize if you're going to make a concession. Like I said a few minutes ago, the worst thing you could do is simply like go in, you do your listing presentation, you say, hey, I charge 6 apples to do this. And they say, well, I'll do it for 5. And you say, okay, sign here. You're going to have a problem with that person now because they think that the number you started with was like baloney. So he said, anytime you make a concession, you have to rationalize it to the person and say why you're doing it. And even better, make sure that you're getting something in return. Always do, he said, also always do your concessions in tiny increments. So this is what he means by that. Let's say you go in at 6 apples and they only want to pay 5. You could say, well, one of the things I could do is go down to 5.75 apples because I won't do professional photography right out of the gate. I'll come in and do photos on it. And let's see if we can get an offer without the professional. So now it's like conceding on both sides. But he says, always get something in return. Last but not least, one of the things he said to think about, and this comes into really knowing your competition, is, yes, Julie. So when I said assign values, so for example, he's like, instead of just throwing out your value proposition in your listing, saying like, here's the 50 things I do, he says that you should know, even if it's not like dollar for dollar in your listing presentation, like, hey, my professional photography is worth $2,500. He said, you need to know in your head so that when the time comes to negotiate, you can say, like I just said, so instead of 6 apples, I'm willing to go to 5.75 because the value of professional photography is about $2,500, which is around 0.25%. So I'm willing to knock off 0.25% because we're not going to right out of the gate do professional photography. We'll save that for down the road. But the other piece he talked about is really understanding, instead of negotiating against yourself, he said you should spend more time like thinking about what the other party's next best alternative is. So the next best alternative is, if the person doesn't hire me, then what is their next best alternative? So their next best alternative is that they're going to get another real estate agent in, and you should have an idea. I think it's fine to ask, like, who is the other person? You should have an idea of where your value proposition stacks up against theirs so that you can articulate that in the negotiating process. So what I mean by that is we have a lot of competitors, for example, that they have agents that answer the phone. So the listing agent does not control the listing. So if a call comes in or a lead comes in on the listing, it goes to whomever is answering the phone, usually a newer agent at the company. So knowing that the next best alternative is that the agent is going to list with this this other competitor in the marketplace, and their next best alternative is that they are going to get an agent that has no control over the leads that come in on the property. What this negotiator said is that you need to be amazing at articulating why that next best alternative for them is super expensive. So saying like, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I understand that you're also speaking to this agent from ABC Realty. I want to just talk to you for a moment about their business model, because they're a great organization, but the way their business model works, it is not always in the best interest of their sellers. And so it could end up costing you a great deal of money. Here's what I mean by that. At my company, if a lead comes in on your property, that means a sign call, an internet lead comes in, somebody just calls me from the street because they see the for sale sign, or a mailing goes out, that call is going to go to me. There is nobody better suited to sell your property than me. So, because I understand it. I've been through your property. I know everything about this property. Now, what happens at the firm down the street is, even though XYZ agent is fantastic, if a call comes in on your property, most likely it is not that agent that's going to handle the call. It's going to be somebody who's answering the phone. That's just how their business model works. In fact, you can go if you drive by one of these listings, look it up and see who the list agent is, and call the office and see who's giving you information on the property. The reason that's not good for you, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, is because the person answering the phone, A, doesn't know everything about your property. They are not the ones best suited to sell your property. B, they might have other listings. So who knows if they're going to actually direct the person to come, or they might say, yeah, that's a great property, but I have 5 others. Let me take you to those. And if you still like that one, we'll get you into it. So always know what the next best alternative is, and be able to articulate what that means, like what the cost of that next best alternative is. I would even argue that even if your next best alternative, because let's just say that you have, say, 1 or 2 listings, and you're up against a powerhouse in that marketplace. Knowing that, now you know that their next best alternative is a powerhouse real estate agent in the market who has 15 listings. I would say that I would articulate that at the listing table and say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I understand that you want to go with XYZ agent because they clearly do a lot of business in the marketplace. Just because somebody does a lot of business in a marketplace does not mean that they get their clients the most money in the least amount of time. It just means that they do a lot of business. What I would suggest Mr. and Mrs. Seller to think about is that when you list with me, I'm going to be concentrating. This is going to be my full-time job, getting your property sold. If you list with that other company, just note that they do have 15 current properties on the market. What that tells me is that I know that they have a team that works on it. That means that you're not getting XYZ mega agent who is going to take your call at Saturday night at 7 o'clock when you have a question. They have a team that helps them because it's like a factory of selling real estate. With me, you're going to get personal concierge service. I'm available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and getting you the most money for your property is my sole and exclusive job until we get this property sold. So think about that. You got to have an idea of what your competition is doing no matter what, but there's always a next best alternative. And to be a killer negotiator, you must always know what the other side's next best alternative is, because the only way you can properly negotiate with that person is to be able to articulate why you are better or a better option, a better opportunity than their next best alternative. So with that, this was I was going to take it very short, as I said at the beginning, because it's Labor Day weekend, and here we are over 30 minutes. But I'm going to put together a program on this. Thank you to you guys for paying attention today. Like I said, I'm going to put together a great program on negotiating. In fact, I'm going to see if I can get this guy. He was so phenomenal, either to come out. He's Denver based, so I don't know that I can get him to come out for a program or even like a webinar, because I will tell you, it changed the way. It was like a mind shift watching this guy talk about the anchoring and next best alternative and how to handle concessions. And I think what I know is you guys are the creme de la creme of real estate agents. And I want to make sure that you guys know how to get what you're worth when you're at a listing table. What was his name? Kim. I'm going to look it up right now. So it was called, his name was Joe Hernandez, and his company is Lion Share. Lion, like a lion. That's us, Lion Share Negotiations. And he's an expert on architecting exceptional deals. So, and it's lionsharenegotiations.com. But I'm going to work on that, see if we can at least get a webinar in place or something on that. But with that, have an awesome Labor Day weekend. And I will be back next week for our Friday mornings live at 9-ish coaching call. Thank you, guys. Bye.